Hello, I'm Tony DeMaria, the editor of Jack, here to tell you about some of the highlights in the April 24th issue of Jack. And the first one comes from the Target trial, and it addresses the issue that many of the heart failure patients who undergo cardiac resynchronization by means of biventricular pacing don't actually benefit. And so there's a need for some way, some strategy to enhance the percentage of patients who do receive a benefit. And the Target investigators hypothesized that if they paced the latest contracting myocardial segment as identified by strain echocardiography, that the percentage of patients who would benefit would increase. And so, in fact, in the patients that they studied, this turned out exactly to be the case. In the patients in whom they were able to pace the latest contracting segment as identified by strain echocardiography, about 70% of the patients showed a benefit in the primary endpoint of a 15% reduction in end systolic volume, as compared to only about 50% of the patients in whom this was not possible. Now, one of the limitations of this study was that they were only able to apply this strategy to 2/3 of the patients they studied. There were limitations on exactly where the pacing electrode could be positioned. Nevertheless, some very encouraging data that suggests that we can identify the optimal targets for biventricular pacing by virtue of the latest contracting segment by Doppler strain echocardiography. Now, another interesting study comes to us from the Jupiter study, which assessed the benefit of statin therapy in patients with normal to low LDLs but elevated CRPs. And in this study, they questioned whether or not there was a way to predict residual risk, because we know even in the patients on statin therapy that risk existed. And so they evaluated the potential of the analysis of apolipoprotein B, of non-HDL cholesterol, and the various ratios between HDL and LDL to identify those patients at residual risk. The bottom line was none of these parameters were any better than LDL itself. A final interesting study, the so-called NIPS study, very innovatively used implanted cardioverter defibrillators to administer programmed ventricular stimulation in patients who underwent ablation for ventricular tachycardia. And the findings of this study are interesting in that about 20% of patients who had no provocable arrhythmia at the time of VT ablation were able to be provoked 3 to 5 days after by this non-invasive program stimulation. They also observed that those patients in whom clinical arrhythmias could be provoked by non-invasive defibrillator stimulation actually had a much worse prognosis than those patients who could not. So exactly what to do with these patients once one identifies that they can be provoked in the 3 to 5 day time period after VT ablation is uncertain, but nevertheless an important identifying information. For Inside Jack, I'm Tony DeMaria.